The galaxy knew humanity. Not well, not truly, but it knew of them. A young species, confined mostly to a single, blue-green world and its immediate solar system. They were known for their chaotic emotions, their surprising resilience against internal strife, and their primitive, albeit rapidly developing, technology. They were traders, sometimes explorers, often overlooked. The Galactic Union, a sprawling, ancient entity of 1,000 species, saw Earth as a backwater, a potential resource node perhaps, but certainly not a threat. They sent warnings, casual communiques about trespass, about respecting established interstellar lanes, about the proper procedures for registering warp signatures. Earth sent polite, if firm, replies, asserting their sovereignty, their desire for peaceful coexistence, but also their right to explore their own stellar neighborhood. The Union paid little heed. They had protocols, treaties, and a fleet that had seen off empires older than humanity's recorded history. A single-system species posed no challenge. They were an amusing distraction, perhaps, but nothing more. Their pleas for recognition, for inclusion, for understanding were met with bureaucratic indifference or outright disdain. They called Earthlings emotional, unpredictable. They were not wrong. Humanity felt deeply, grieved profoundly, and when provoked, their rage was a silent, terrifying force. The provocation came. Not from a rival empire, but from a minor Union signatory, the Cthar hegemony, bolstered by Union assurances of non-interference in resource acquisition initiatives. The target was Mars. Not for conquest, not for settlement, but for a rare mineral deposit located beneath the Crimson Plains. The Cthar fleet arrived without declaration of war, merely a trespass warning broadcast on public channels, intended more as a humiliation than a courtesy. Earth's fledgling system defense fleet, small and reliant on older Union surplus tech acquired through gray markets, attempted to intercede. They were annihilated. Entire crews vaporized in the vacuum. Colony outposts on Mars were glassed from orbit, the few thousand souls there extinguished before they could even understand the nature of the attack. It was swift, brutal, and utterly one-sided. The Cthar, arrogant and dismissive, broadcast their victory, displaying the wreckage of Earth's ships as trophies. The Union issued a brief statement, regretting the unfortunate incident, but upholding the Cthar's right to secure resources within unclaimed systems, subtly redefining the solar system's status. A single freighter, the Odyssey, had been en route to a distant asteroid mining facility. It witnessed the tail end of the massacre from the system's outer edge. Its captain, Elias Vance, watched the sensor feeds, the silent screams across the void, the utter disregard for life. He saw the orbital bombardment turn familiar red dust into fused glass. He recorded everything. The Cthar ships never bothered to check for stragglers, why would they? It was just Earth. The Odyssey turned back, its crew of 27 carrying the weight of 3 billion dead on Mars, and the cold, hard truth of galactic indifference. They made it back to Earth's orbit days later, a ghost ship returning to a world reeling from a blow it never imagined possible. The broadcast from the Odyssey was played across the globe. There were no protests, no riots, no grand speeches calling for immediate war. There was only silence. A profound, echoing silence that blanketed the world. Grief was a physical weight, pressing down on cities, on continents. 3 billion dead. Children, scientists, miners, families. Vaporized for rocks. And the galaxy had watched, or simply not cared. The initial grief coalesced, hardened, into something else. Something cold. Something ancient. Something terrible. It was rage. Not the hot, fleeting anger the Union expected from the emotional Earthlings. This was a cold, crystalline rage, sharp and enduring. Political divisions dissolved. National borders became meaningless lines on forgotten maps. Humanity spoke with one voice, fueled by a shared trauma, a collective wound that would never heal. A vow was made, not in council halls or public squares, but in the hearts of every man, woman, and child who saw the glassed plains of Mars or the ghostly images from the Odyssey. Never again. Never again would they be weak. Never again would they be underestimated. Never again would they be victims. The vow was a cornerstone, a new foundation for their entire civilization. Earth went dark. Communication ceased. Warp signatures vanished from galactic sensor nets. The Union assumed internal collapse, perhaps civil war born of despair. The Cthar celebrated their easy victory and the valuable minerals they now freely extracted. The galaxy forgot about Earth, or dismissed it as another failed species, a cautionary tale of the perils of unchecked emotion. Years passed. 5 years. 10. 20. The Cthar mined, the Union maintained its arrogant stability, and the galaxy moved on. They did not know that beneath the silent surface of Earth, and across its scattered, now hidden colonies, a transformation was underway. Every resource, every mind, every effort was bent towards a single, grim purpose, the fulfillment of the vow. Scientists delved into forbidden fields, whispering of manipulating spacetime, of harnessing exotic matter, of understanding the fundamental fabric of reality in ways the ancient Union powers never dared. Engineers built fleets in silent orbital foundries, ships unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, forged not just from metal and energy, but from grief and absolute resolve. Soldiers trained, not for conventional warfare, but for something colder, more precise, utterly unforgiving. They remembered Mars. They remembered the silence. They remembered the vow. The galaxy had 20 years to forget. 20 years to grow complacent. The human fleet reappeared not with a broadcast, but with an action. There was no warning. No declaration. Silence had been their teacher, and silence was their weapon. Their return wasn't at Earth's border, but deep within Cthar territory, at the Cthar system itself. One moment, space was empty. The next, it wasn't. There was no detectable warp signature, no energy bloom indicative of conventional FTL arrival. Their ships simply were. Sleek, dark vessels that absorbed sensor energy, their hulls like voids against the starlight. The Cthar home fleet scrambled, arrogant even in their surprise. They outnumbered the human ships tenfold. Their weapons, the same that had reduced Mars to glass, fired. Energy lances, kinetic slugs, plasma torpedoes. The human ships didn't evade. They didn't need to. As the enemy fire washed over them, it simply ceased. Withered. Dissipated as if encountering an impossible drain. The Cthar watched in disbelief as their mightiest weapons dissolved into harmless light shows moments before impact. Then, the human ships responded. Not with lances of light or torrents of fire. Their weapons were subtle, terrifying. One Cthar destroyer, its commander still shouting orders, simply flickered. Not like a power failure, but like a bad holographic projection. And then it was gone. Not exploded, not destroyed, but unmade. Its mass, its energy, its very existence, simply vanished from reality, leaving behind not wreckage, but an unnerving void where it had been. Another Cthar cruiser began to twist, its hull warping and folding in on itself as if caught in the grip of an unseen, impossible gravity well. Its internal system screamed for a moment on the comms, a cacophony of tearing metal and terrified voices, before falling silent as it collapsed into a singularity too small to pose a threat, yet too unnatural to comprehend. Admiral Elias Vance, the scarred face of the Odyssey captain now lined with 2 decades of silent fury and relentless purpose, watched from the bridge of the flagship vigil. His voice was calm, level, devoid of any emotion save cold resolve. Execute plan designation Mars. Leave nothing operational. Leave no doubt his ship, like the others, bore no visible weapon ports. Their power was drawn from within, from the manipulation of forces the Cthar, and the Union they served, couldn't even name. They were the architects of the void, the weavers of reality, the cold hands of retribution. The Cthar arrogance shattered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. Their mighty fleet, the pride of their hegemony, was being systematically removed from existence by an enemy that wasn't even fighting in a way they understood. Panic erupted on their comms, filling the void with pleas, screams, and desperate, illogical commands. But there was no response from the humans. Only the silent, relentless unmaking of their ships. Within hours, the Kthar home fleet, the instrument of Mars' destruction, was gone. Not destroyed, but meticulously dismantled, ship by ship, until only empty space remained. The message was delivered not in words, but in absolute, terrifying finality. Earth had returned. And it remembered. The first decisive strike echoed across the galaxy, not through conventional channels, which the human fleet had swiftly disabled, but through the few, terrified Kthar survivors who managed to flee in escape pods, picked up days later by neutral freighters. Their accounts were hysterical, unbelievable. Ships vanishing, metal twisting like clay, weapons failing. The Galactic Union dismissed them as battle fatigue, hallucinations. Surely, the primitive Earthlings hadn't developed such power. It was impossible. Their disbelief was their undoing. The campaign of retribution was methodical. It was not a wild, emotional rampage the Union had perhaps braced for. It was a calculated dismantling of every species, every system, every asset that had played a role in the Mars atrocity, or had profited from it, or had simply stood by and watched. The Kthar hegemony was first. Not only their fleet, but their orbital infrastructure, their military bases, their command centers. These were not annihilated, they were neutralized with chilling precision. Weapons were disabled, power grids collapsed, communications silenced. Key leaders were captured or simply disappeared. Their planets were spared orbital bombardment, left intact, but isolated, powerless, a stark monument to the cost of their arrogance. Then came the Union signatories who had endorsed or benefited from the Kthar action. One by one, their defenses were bypassed, their fleets rendered inert, their critical infrastructure neutralized. The method varied, always unexpected. Sometimes it was the silent unmaking, sometimes it was weaponized temporal distortion that aged ships to dust in seconds, sometimes it was null energy fields that left crews frozen in place, alive but utterly unable to move or act. The humans deployed fleets of silent drones, cloaked and seemingly unarmed, that could dismantle a starship's systems from within, or rewrite the targeting protocols of planetary defenses to fire on their own cities. Psychological warfare was a key component. Human broadcasts, transmitted on frequencies the Union thought secure, didn't boast or threaten. They simply played back the Kthar victory broadcast from 20 years prior, intercut with the raw, shaky sensor feeds from the Odyssey showing the glassing of Mars. Sometimes, a single, cold human voice would speak over the images. You watched, it would say. You profited. You forgot. We didn't. This silent, omnipresent reminder of their complicity and Earth's long memory sowed terror and dissent within the Union's ranks. Systems began to question their allegiance, fearing they would be next. The Union's attempts to respond were futile. Their vast fleets, their ancient strategies, their complex logistics networks were useless against an enemy that moved in silence, attacked without warning, and used weapons that seemed to defy the laws of physics as they understood them. Decoys and feints led Union fleets into traps where they were neutralized or crippled. Their intelligence networks were penetrated or fed false information. Every Union countermeasure was met with a bewilderingly effective human countermeasure, often before the Union even fully understood the threat. It became terrifyingly clear that humanity was not just employing new tactics or technology, they had grasped something fundamental about reality itself that the Union's millennia of existence had never uncovered, or perhaps, had deliberately avoided. There were rumors of black vaults opened, of whispering machines that spoke of cosmic secrets, of a collective human consciousness now wired into the very fabric of spacetime. What the galaxy saw was only the tip of an iceberg of power, its true depths hinted at by the sheer effortlessness of their victories. The crumbling of Union cohesion was swift and brutal. Fear is a potent solvent. As system after system fell silent or was neutralized, the trust that held the ancient union together evaporated. Signatories began to withdraw, pleading neutrality, hoping to avoid the terrifying silent ships. Internal factions turned on each other, blaming leadership, hoarding resources, attempting to cut deals with the silent humans. The central authority became paralyzed, unable to coordinate a unified response against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. In desperation, the Union leadership, composed mostly of the dominant species like the arrogant Elderly and the bureaucratic Vrhan, turned to desperate measures. They authorized the activation of ancient, forbidden superweapons, devices designed during long-forgotten wars against cosmic horrors. There was the Chronos Gate, rumored to weaponize causality, or the Stellar Shaper, capable of inducing stellar instability. These weapons, poorly understood even by their keepers, were their last hope. They activated the Chronos Gate near a major human fleet concentration. For a terrifying moment, reality shuddered. Time seemed to loop, echoing future and past simultaneously. But the human ships didn't falter. Instead, their silent energy fields expanded, not combating the effect, but seeming to absorb it, integrate it. The Chronos Gate overloaded, turning its uncontrolled temporal energies inward, erasing the Union task force that activated it from the timeline entirely. It seemed humanity didn't just wield forbidden power, they understood it on a level that made the Union's attempts look like a child playing with cosmic fire. The inevitable confrontation came not in a distant system, but at the very core of the Union, the Elderly Hegemon's home system, orbit of the opulent planet Eldoria Prime, seat of galactic power for millennia. The human fleet arrived as they always did, without warning, simply materializing in the system's void. The Union's last, greatest fleet, augmented by ancient defense platforms and their remaining superweapon prototypes, waited. This wasn't a battle of annihilation. It was a demonstration. The human ships moved through the Union defenses with chilling ease, their systems unresponsive, their weapons impotent. The silent ships didn't destroy Eldoria Prime. They didn't even glass its surface. Instead, they positioned themselves in a silent, unbreakable cordon around the planet. Then, a single transmission was sent galaxy-wide, overriding all channels. It was not Admiral Vance. It was a chorus of voices, young and old, speaking in unison. 20 years ago, the chorus began, the sound unnervingly calm, you allowed Mars to burn. You profited from our pain. You forgot us, images flickered across all screens, the Odyssey's footage, the glassy plains, the Cthar ships. We could unmake this world, the voices continued, the potential for utter annihilation palpable in the quiet tone. We could erase your history, scatter your atoms to the void, a pause, heavy with implied power. But we choose not to. Not yet, this was the moment of choice, not driven by mercy, but by a cold calculation. Total destruction was possible, easy even. But leaving them alive, powerless, under the silent gaze of the human fleet, was a far more potent lesson. The galaxy-wide realization was immediate and absolute. The Union was broken. The ancient power had fallen, not to a rival, but to the species it had dismissed as primitive. Fear, cold and deep, spread through 1,000 species. The humans weren't just powerful, they were incomprehensible, their motives inscrutable, their capabilities seemingly limitless. The era of the Galactic Union was over. The era of Earth's silent, terrifying dominance had begun. The old order was gone, replaced by a vast, silent unknown. The establishment of new dominance wasn't marked by treaties or declarations. The human hegemony, as some species fearfully began to call it, exerted control through presence and reputation. Silent human fleets patrolled former Union space, not as conquerors, but as sentinels. Trade lanes reopened, but under human oversight. Communications flowed, but every species knew the silent watchers were listening. There was no attempt to integrate or assimilate. Humanity remained largely isolated, a distant, powerful entity whose gaze alone enforced a fragile peace born of terror. The galaxy held its breath. The inspiration or exploitation of victory was immediate. Oppressed species who had suffered under Union rule saw Earth's success as a beacon. Uprisings sparked across former Union territories. Some genuinely sought liberation, others simply seized the opportunity for power, often adopting the chilling silence and ruthless efficiency they had seen from the humans. This created pockets of chaos and new minor power blocks, some attempting to forge alliances with Earth, others wary of their new overlords. Earth offered no aid, issued no statements of support. They simply watched, their silence a cryptic response. Within the human hegemony itself, the internal moral/ethical dilemmas surfaced. The unity forged in trauma began to show cracks. The generation that remembered Mars was aging. A new generation, raised only in the shadow of the vow and the subsequent conquest, saw the galaxy not as oppressors and victims, but as territory to be controlled, resources to be managed. Factions emerged, the hardliners who believed total control and unwavering strength were the only guarantees of survival, advocating for swift, brutal suppression of any dissent, the pragmatists who sought to establish a stable, if distant, peace, and the weary, those who had seen too much death and questioned the cost of their victory, wondering if they had merely become the new monsters in the dark. Admiral Vance, the symbol of their vengeance, often stood at the center of these debates, his silence sometimes interpreted as unwavering resolve, sometimes as profound weariness. The emergence of new antagonists was inevitable. Remnants of the old Union, particularly the proud Eldari and Vr Han, plotted in secret, nursing their grudges and seeking any weakness in the human facade. Some of the new power blocks, emboldened by early successes, became overly ambitious and clashed with human patrols, testing the limits of their patience. And then there were the internal factions, the most dangerous threat. A hardline group, the Vigilant Accord, believed Vance and the Old Guard were becoming soft, losing their edge. They advocated for expanding human territory, for preemptive strikes against any potential threat, for using their full, terrifying power not just as a deterrent, but as a tool of absolute control. Their methods mirrored the very arrogance and cruelty humanity had sworn to avenge, hinting at a grim future. A new, fragile status quo settled upon the galaxy. The Galactic Union was no more. Earth's human hegemony was the dominant power, its reach extending through silent ships and the omnipresent threat of incomprehensible weapons. It was not an empire built on trade or cultural exchange, but on fear and the memory of a single, devastating act. True peace remained elusive, replaced by a tense, watchful quiet. Every species looked to Earth, wondering what the silent masters would do next. Humanity grappled with its new role and its burden. They were protectors, judges, executioners. They were the memory keepers, ensuring the galaxy never forgot the price of underestimation. They were isolated by their power, feared even by those they had liberated. Admiral Vance, now an aged figurehead, often spoke of the weight they carried, the constant vigilance required. Their power was absolute, but it demanded a sacrifice, a return to the normal life they once knew seemed impossible. They were defined by the vow, forever tied to the silent rage that had fueled their rise. The lingering threat was not just external, from vengeful remnants or ambitious newcomers, but internal. The Vigilant Accord grew in influence, their calls for expansion and absolute control resonating with those who saw restraint as weakness. The ultimate power unlocked in the Black Vaults remained, a temptation and a danger. Had they merely swapped one oppressive regime for another? The cycle of violence seemed poised to repeat, with humanity now in the dominant position, facing the choice of breaking it or perpetuating it. Admiral Vance's final, galaxy-wide broadcast was short, devoid of visuals. Just his voice, rough with age but still resonant with authority. "We came to remind you," he said. "To remind you that the dismissed, the underestimated, carry weight. To remind you that silence can hold a terrible promise. You do not need us to rule you. You simply need to remember Mars. And remember this, there will not be a third chance." The transmission ended. No fanfare. Just silence. The galaxy was left with the weight of that silence, and the chilling knowledge that humanity, forged in the fires of betrayal and armed with the understanding of realities beyond their ken, was watching. The cost of vengeance was paid, not just by the fallen Union, but by humanity itself, forever altered, forever burdened by the power they had wielded. The future was uncertain, precarious, balanced on the knife edge of remembrance and restraint.